Greetings and welcome to Biology Day 78. And we're continuing on with our discussion of anatomy and physiology. So we've got warm-up questions on the board, so make sure we continue to those. Turn them in on day 80, so they're available there. Moving on, so we've got our positive moment, class prayer, moment of silence. You can pause the video and reflect on one of those if you would like. And then back to the warm-up questions, and then we'll continue on past this into the assignments for today. So homework from last time was HO8, which is the circulatory and respiratory systems. So you've got the work on that that's due today, and then continuing working on the tutoring, make sure you get those in. And then new homework is HO9, digestive and excretory systems. We'll talk about kind of how those two work together. So our objectives for the day: the digestive system converts large molecules into small molecules that can be used by cells of the body. So we'll talk about how that happens. So food is processed in 4 stages: ingestion, digestion, absorption, and elimination. And then during digestion, food travels through the mouth, esophagus, stomach, and small intestine. And then excretory system, which includes the skin, lungs, liver, and kidneys, excrete metabolic waste from the body. So we'll see some of the key terms are mechanical digestion, chemical digestion, peristalsis, bolus, villus, ureter, urinary bladder, and urethra. All right. So starting off with the digestive system first. So well, actually starting off with everything, we've kind of got our bodies, right? We know we have bodies, and we know that we put food and stuff into our bodies, food and drink into our bodies, and the stuff eventually comes out, like poop and pee or urine and feces, right? And so the question we're looking at today is like, what's going on in between, right? So let's see if we can figure out how that happens. All right. So just a quick note on the worksheet here. So I tried to organize the document to kind of best follow the path of stuff through the body. So kind of got a little bit of a header here, and then we'll begin mouth, oral cavity, and pharynx. Jump over to the esophagus, down to the stomach, over to the supplementary organs, small intestine, and large intestine. So it's kind of organized in a slightly unusual pattern there, but I tried to follow along: food through the mouth, esophagus, stomach, and then kind of everything that's around the stomach, and the small intestines kind of makes up everything here, and the large intestine starts down in this quadrant and comes out. All right, so moving on to comparing the digestive system. So we have several organs that all work together to break nutrients down from big things into small things, small enough that we can absorb them into our bloodstream. And most animals share the same basic structure. So whether you're looking at an earthworm or a grasshopper or a human, you have a mouth region, you have a esophagus region, you have kind of a stomach region, right? And then we have intestinal regions, right? And so we see the same kind of basic pattern: oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus. In people, pretty similar to what we find in worms or grasshoppers, or any animal for that matter, for the most part. All right, so we're going to go ahead and label some parts on our worksheet. So we'll start off labeling the oral cavity and the esophagus, and let's describe those. So the oral cavity is where we begin mechanical and chemical digestion. And what we're doing is we're chewing up food with our teeth, and we're mixing it with saliva. And this massive stuff that kind of travels down our throat, that's known as a bolus. That bolus of food is going to travel down there. So the mechanical breakdown part is known as mastication. It's the act of mechanically breaking food down by chewing. So we use our teeth and we grind those up. And we've got different types of teeth for cutting or grinding: incisors and molars and whatnot, but we're mechanically breaking down big chunks of food into small chunks of food. As a bit of and this occurs in the mouth there. And as a bit of a side, there was a guy by the name of Forrest Fletcher who actually kind of made a living for himself. He was known as the great masticator, and he kind of really promoted this idea of chewing food significantly. And kind of some sayings attributed to him was that food should be chewed 32 times before swallowing, and nature will castigate those who don't masticate. So ways to chew your food. And really, he thought it was a big deal there. Next thing we want to look at is the esophagus. So the esophagus is this tube that runs from the pharynx, which is the back part of the throat, down to the stomach. And through that pharynx, through that esophagus, we're going to have peristalsis, which is this contraction of that muscles behind that bolus of food, and is going to drive it down into it. So it'll actually relax in front and contract behind, and that bolus of food will travel down and will relax this ring of muscles here, which is called the cardiac sphincter or lower esophageal sphincter. Open that up, and then that bolus of food will get squeezed into the stomach going that way. All right, so opens the cardiac sphincter to the stomach there. A couple little video clips if you want to watch those. They kind of show some good information on that happening there. So that's there. And then we'll continue on. So now we've got our stomach. So your stomach, we tend to think of stomach like something like this, but despite really kind of what this guy's got going on here, most of that is not stomach. Most of that is probably abdominal fat or large intestine and small intestine, really. His stomach is actually, our stomach is kind of in the upper left quadrant of your belly. So it's kind of this particular area here. So if you feel your left ribs, and then just kind of down behind that and below that is where we're going to find our stomach there. And so when we look at the stomach, its main function is to continue mechanical and chemical digestion, and we start to get partial digestion of proteins. And there's a thick-walled muscular sac. It can expand to hold 2+ liters of food, and it's got all these different folds called rugae in it to kind of help it expand and contract in there. It has two openings. The one at the top is called the cardiac sphincter, and the one at the bottom is known as the pyloric sphincter. And a sphincter is any just ring of muscles that kind of can pinch down and become watertight, right? So we have food that comes in, this is closed off, this becomes closed off, and it just kind of squishes and squishes and squishes it, and then we relax this one here, and then food moves out of the stomach into the small intestine. It is worth noting that the cardiac sphincter and the esophageal sphincter are the same thing. They're part of the same part of it there. Then we have kind of a picture of the stomach here. This is a rabbit stomach, so we've got the esophagus, the cardiac or esophageal sphincter right there, pyloric sphincter there leading into the small intestine going off that way. All right, we'll go ahead and label the accessory digestive organs. So we've got the pancreas, we've got the liver, the gallbladder, and the appendix are the key accessory organs that we're going to be looking at in this part. All right, and then, so liver, what is its function? It's primarily involved in detoxification, protein production, metabolism, ammonia breakdown, and also bile production, which aids in fat digestion. The pancreas aids in digestion, but it also produces hormones. It's a key player on the endocrine system as well. The gallbladder stores bile for aid in fat digestion, so the liver produces the bile, the gallbladder stores it. And then the appendix is near where the small and large intestine meet, which is in the lower right quadrant of your abdominal cavity there. And for a long time, people didn't know if it had any purpose, but we now think that it may play a role in helping with immunity. All right, so here you can see the liver across there, with the gallbladder just down below. The pancreas is kind of tucked down underneath there behind the stomach, and then the appendix is down here. All right. And then we'll go and look at the small intestine, which is this kind of mess in the middle right there. So it comes in, there's 3 regions to it, but it's kind of most of the middle of the bulk of what's going on there. And the small intestine is held relatively in place by this type of material called mesentery. And if we look at the small intestine, its function is chemical digestion. So this is where we're going to absorb a lot of that material that we broke down into small bits in the food there. And it's relatively long, 6.5 meters or so, 15 to 20 feet is kind of what I've heard. Relatively small in diameter, 2.5 centimeters in diameter, is about the size of most people's thumb, about 1 inch in diameter there. 3 parts, duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. So duodenum is the first part, the jejunum is the middle part, and the ileum is the third part. And it has a really high surface area to increase absorption. And to give it that high surface area, it's long and it's lined with lots of folds, and it's covered with these little tiny bumps called, so here's a fold and here's a fold, but each little bump is all these little knobby bits on it, finger-like projections called villi, and then on the surface of each villi, each individual cell is also covered with its own little tiny folds called microvilli, which are just part of the cell membrane. So all of this together gives it lots and lots and lots of surface area. So here's an image, so you can see the small intestine here. You can see the vascular tissue. This would be the arteries and veins coming in to pick up the nutrients from the food, and then the mesentery tissue, which kind of holds everything in place there. So again, folds, villi, and then the microvilli, which is this image is here on the surface there. All right, and then on your worksheet, it asks you to kind of draw some images. So this would be the folds, this would be the villi, which would be on top of the folds, and then these would be the microvilli, which would be on top of individual cells of the villi. All right, and then last part we'll look at is the next last part is the large intestine. So large intestine kind of has 3 segments to it here, and there's actually a 4th segment over here that's called the sigmoid colon. It's not on there, but we don't worry about that one. Its main function is the reabsorption of water. So kind of as that mass of food moves through your body, you're continually adding fluids to it. So we want to retract and pull some of those fluids back there. We also absorb vitamins that are produced by symbiotic bacteria. We actually have a huge amount of bacteria that live within our large intestine. They produce things like vitamin K, which is necessary for blood clotting. And this is primarily we can get rid of those things that we weren't able to digest. So cellulose from plant cells, bacteria, bile, mucus, worn out cells in the digestive system, kind of all that comes into play. And it's important to note that no digestion actually occurs here. And if we look at this, it's relatively short, 1.5 meters, about 5 feet in length by about 2 inches. So it's called the large intestine because it's larger in diameter. And there's 3 parts, as I said, ascending, transverse, and descending. Here's kind of an image showing that large intestine kind of going all the way through there. And then we've got a last part, our rectum and our anus there. So this is where we're going to store waste until we're ready to eliminate it as feces. And we'll go ahead and stop there, take our stretch break, and we'll pick back up with the last little bit in just a second. All right, thank you for listening to that part.